The Grenelle gunpowder explosion. Picture this: Revolutionary France, 1794. While the guillotine claimed lives in public squares, an even deadlier threat was hiding in plain sight. Deep in the Grenelle district of Paris, workers packed gunpowder into barrels mere blocks from where families slept. The authorities knew it was dangerous. They knew black powder could explode at the slightest spark. But war doesn't wait for safety. August 31st started like any other morning until it didn't. Without warning, the entire factory became a weapon. The explosion tore through Paris like thunder from hell itself. Buildings didn't just collapse, they disintegrated. The shockwave shattered windows across the city. Workers vanished in an instant. Entire families were crushed under their own homes. Fires consumed everything the blast hadn't already destroyed. When the smoke finally cleared, hundreds were dead. Over 1,000 more lay wounded in the rubble. Here's what makes this terrifying. This wasn't an enemy attack. This was progress, killing the very people it promised to serve. For the first time in history, a major city learned that industrial power could be just as deadly as any army. The Grenelle disaster was a warning. The question was, would anyone listen? The Courrières mining disaster. March 10th, 1906. Deep beneath northern France, over 1,000 men descended into darkness, just like they did every morning. But this morning, the mine was trying to tell them something. For days, smoke had been seeping through the tunnels. Toxic gases hung in the air. Every miner could feel it. Every supervisor knew it. And yet, the order came down. Keep digging. Profit doesn't stop for warnings. Then it happened. A coal dust explosion ripped through the underground labyrinth like a bullet through flesh. Multiple shafts detonated simultaneously. Tunnels collapsed in chain reactions. Deadly gases flooded every passage. More than 1,000 miners, including children barely tall enough to swing a pickaxe, were trapped in total darkness, thousands of feet below the surface. The rescue efforts? A disgrace. After just a few days, management did the unthinkable. They sealed sections of the mine, not to save lives, to save coal. They knowingly buried men alive to protect their investment. Weeks later, against all odds, a handful of miners emerged like ghosts, starved, traumatized, but alive. The final count? Over 1,100 dead. Entire communities erased. The public exploded with rage. Strikes paralyzed France, and the world learned a brutal lesson. When profit comes before people, everybody pays the price. The Sengenid colliery disaster, October 14, 1913, 8:00 a.m. Hundreds of Welsh miners kissed their families goodbye and descended into the Universal Colliery, a pit with a deadly reputation. Everyone knew it was dangerous. Safety violations were routine. Previous accidents had already claimed lives, but coal powered the empire. And empires don't run on safety regulations. At 8:10 a.m., methane gas met a single spark deep underground. The explosion was instant and absolute. A fireball tore through the tunnels, igniting coal dust and turning the entire mine into a crematorium. Ventilation systems collapsed. Smoke and poison filled every shaft. Those who survived the initial blast faced something worse: slow suffocation in pitch-black darkness. Fathers and sons worked these mines together. They descended together, and they died together. When rescue teams finally brought out the last body, the count was devastating: 439 dead. The worst mining disaster in British history. An inquiry exposed the truth. Ignored warnings, inadequate inspections, deliberate corner cutting. The mine owners fined a laughable amount, barely enough to buy a new suit. But Sengenid became a symbol, a rallying cry, a grim proof that without enforcement, safety laws are just words on paper, written in the blood of working people. The Oppau fertilizer explosion, September 21st, 1921. The town of Oppau, Germany. At the local chemical plant, workers faced a routine problem. Fertilizer had hardened in the storage silos. The solution: use small explosives to break it up. They'd done it hundreds of times before without incident, but here's what they didn't know. The chemical composition had changed. The fertilizer sitting in those silos wasn't stable anymore. It was a time bomb. One worker placed a small charge, stepped back, and lit the fuse. What happened next was biblical. The entire facility exploded at once, not in stages, but as a single, apocalyptic detonation. A crater formed where the plant used to stand. The shockwave flattened half the town. Windows shattered kilometers away. Debris rained from the sky like hellfire. In seconds, over 500 people ceased to exist. Nearly 2,000 more were torn apart by flying metal and glass. Thousands were left homeless, wandering through the ruins of what used to be their lives. The world was horrified. But more importantly, the world was educated. Opal proved that shortcuts in industrial chemistry aren't just dangerous, they're apocalyptic. The explosion rewrote global safety standards overnight and transformed Opal from a quiet German town into an eternal warning etched in chemical engineering textbooks. The Great Smog of London, December 1952, an invisible killer settled over London like a suffocating blanket. Coal powered everything: homes, factories, trains, lives. During a brutal cold snap, consumption skyrocketed. Then the weather turned against the city. A temperature inversion trapped all that smoke, all those toxins, directly over 8 million people. For 5 days, London became a gas chamber. The fog was thick enough to touch, yellow-black, greasy. Visibility dropped to arm's length. Cars were abandoned in the streets. Theaters closed mid-performance. People got lost walking home from work. And then people started dying. Hospitals overflowed. The elderly gasped for air they couldn't find. Infants suffocated in their cribs. Emergency rooms looked like war zones. In the immediate aftermath, 4,000 deaths were recorded. But that wasn't the full story. Later research revealed the truth. Over 12,000 people died, making this the deadliest air pollution event in European history. Unlike explosions or mine collapses, the Great Smog killed silently. There was no blast to run from, no alarm to sound, just the slow, invisible suffocation of an entire city. The legacy? Revolutionary. London proved that air itself could be weaponized by industry, and that environmental regulations aren't just bureaucracy, they're survival. The Aberfan disaster, October 21st, 1966, 9:15 a.m. Children sat in their classrooms at Pantglas Junior School in the Welsh village of Aberfan. Teachers took attendance. It was a normal Friday morning. Above them, on the mountainside, towered massive coal waste tips, ugly black mountains of mining debris that had been growing for decades. Engineers had warned repeatedly. The tips were unstable, especially after heavy rain. Their warnings were filed away and forgotten. After days of rainfall, tip number 7 began to move. First slowly, then with terrifying, unstoppable momentum. A wave of black slurry, half liquid and half solid, thundered down the hillside at 50 miles per hour. It hit the school at 9:15 a.m. exactly. Classrooms were crushed like cardboard boxes. Teachers and children were buried alive under thousands of tons of coal waste. Some died instantly. Others suffocated slowly in the darkness, calling for help that would never come. Parents sprinted from their homes, clawing at the debris with bare hands. But it was hopeless. By the time the last body was recovered, 144 people were dead. 116 of them were children. An entire generation of Aberfan erased in minutes. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't an act of God. It was institutional murder, born from negligence, cost-cutting, and the cruel indifference toward working-class lives. Aberfan remains one of the most heartbreaking disasters in history, not because of what happened, but because it was completely, preventably avoidable. The Seveso chemical disaster, July 10, 1976, a quiet Saturday afternoon in northern Italy. At the Icmesa chemical plant near the town of Seveso, a reactor overheated during what should have been routine maintenance. Pressure built. A safety valve opened to release it. But what came out wasn't just steam, it was poison. A cloud of dioxin, one of the most toxic substances ever created by human hands, drifted silently over the countryside. Invisible, odorless, deadly. Within days, animals began dropping dead in the fields. Children developed horrific chemical burns. Crops withered and died. Entire neighborhoods were evacuated as scientists measured contamination levels that defied belief. The immediate death toll was low, but the horror was just beginning. Cancer rates spiked, birth defects became a generational nightmare. The psychological trauma of not knowing if you've been poisoned, or if your children will pay the price, haunted the region for decades. Seveso exposed a terrifying truth. Some industrial disasters don't announce themselves with explosions. They creep into your body, your DNA, your future, and there's no escape. The disaster forced Europe to completely overhaul chemical industry regulations. The Seveso Directive became law across the continent, born from tragedy written in dioxin. The Flixborough chemical explosion, June 1, 1974, the Nipro chemical plant in Flixborough, England. A pipe had cracked during operations, so workers installed a temporary bypass, just a quick fix to keep production running while they waited for the proper part. Nobody thought to get it properly tested. Nobody thought to get an engineer's approval. Nobody thought about what happens when you improvise in a chemical plant. When operations restarted, that temporary pipe ruptured. A massive cloud of cyclohexane, 28 tons of flammable chemical, erupted into the air and instantly ignited. The explosion was so powerful it registered on seismographs miles away. The entire plant ceased to exist in seconds. Workers were vaporized. Nearby homes collapsed like they were made of paper. Windows shattered up to 8 miles away. 28 people died. 36 were seriously injured. Hundreds more were wounded by flying debris. Investigations revealed a culture of improvisation, temporary fixes that became permanent risks. Nobody had documented the change. Nobody had calculated the stress loads. Nobody had asked, "Is this safe?" Flixborough became a turning point in industrial engineering. It proved that in complex systems, there's no such thing as a temporary fix, only delayed catastrophes. The lesson was written in blood. Shortcuts don't save time. They buy coffins. The Piper Alpha oil platform disaster. July 6, 1988. Night shift on the Piper Alpha oil platform, the world's largest offshore production facility, sitting in the freezing waters of the North Sea. During routine maintenance, workers removed a critical safety valve from a condensate pump. They tagged it. They logged it. But when the shift changed, that information never reached the next crew. At 10 p.m., someone flipped a switch. Gas leaked under massive pressure from where that safety valve used to be. Within seconds, it found an ignition source. The explosion turned the platform into a towering inferno, a metal island burning at temperatures hot enough to melt steel. Emergency systems failed immediately. Escape routes were blocked by walls of fire. 167 men were trapped hundreds of feet above freezing ocean water, surrounded by flames and toxic smoke. Their choices were horrifying: burn alive or jump into the dark sea and hope. Many jumped. Most didn't survive. By morning, Piper Alpha was a blackened skeleton. 167 men were dead, the worst offshore disaster in history. Investigations revealed systemic failure at every level, poor communication, inadequate safety protocols, and a culture that prioritized production over human lives. Piper Alpha reshaped offshore safety standards worldwide, but it took 167 deaths to make the industry listen. The Bhopal chemical leaks European echo, December 3, 1984. Bhopal, India. A Union Carbide pesticide plant leaked toxic gas, killing thousands overnight. The world watched in horror. But here's what most people don't know. Europe was dancing on the same knife's edge. Throughout the 1980s, European chemical plants operated with similar hazardous materials, similar complex systems, and similar corners being cut. Smaller leaks were covered up. Near misses were downplayed. Emergency plans existed only on paper. Communities near chemical facilities reported mysterious illnesses. Corporate secrecy delayed investigations. Regulators were underfunded and overwhelmed. Europe was one equipment failure, one shift change miscommunication, one cost-cutting decision away from its own Bhopal. The difference? European leaders recognized the warning signs before the bodies piled up. Bhopal became a mirror, showing Europe exactly what industrial negligence looked like at scale. The response was swift and comprehensive: continent-wide safety regulations, mandatory emergency planning, chemical tracking systems, and community right-to-know laws. Europe avoided its Bhopal moment, not through luck, but through learning from someone else's nightmare. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster, April 26, 1986, 1:23 a.m. Inside reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, operators began a safety test under dangerously unstable conditions. A combination of design flaws, human error, and Soviet-era secrecy culture created the perfect storm. At 1:23 and 40 seconds, the reactor exploded. Not metaphorically, it literally exploded. The containment vessel was ripped apart. A graphite fire ignited, burning at temperatures that would continue for 10 days, releasing radioactive poison into the atmosphere. Firefighters rushed in without proper equipment. They didn't know they were walking into a death sentence. Many absorbed lethal radiation doses within minutes, their bodies literally cooked from the inside by invisible particles. In the nearby city of Pripyat, 50,000 people slept peacefully, unaware they were being irradiated. Authorities didn't sound the alarm for over 24 hours. When evacuation finally came, they were told it would be temporary. It was permanent. Dozens died immediately. Thousands more developed cancers, thymic disorders, genetic mutations. An area the size of Switzerland became uninhabitable for millennia. But the true horror of Chernobyl wasn't just the explosion. It was the lies, the cover-ups, the culture that punished honesty and rewarded denial. Chernobyl didn't just poison land. It poisoned trust in technological systems, in governments, in the promise that progress could be controlled. It remains Europe's most infamous industrial disaster, a wound that will never fully heal. The Basel chemical fire, November 1, 1986. Just months after Chernobyl, Europe faced another industrial nightmare. At a Sandoz chemical warehouse near Basel, Switzerland, a fire broke out at 1 a.m. As flames consumed the building, thousands of tons of toxic chemicals were released. Some flowed directly into the Rhine River. Within hours, the Rhine, one of Europe's most important waterways, turned blood red. The contamination spread like poison through the continent's circulatory system. Fish died by the millions. Drinking water supplies were shut down across Germany, France, and the Netherlands. Ecosystems that had existed for thousands of years were destroyed overnight. Human deaths were minimal, but the environmental carnage was catastrophic. Investigators discovered criminally poor storage practices. No containment systems, no fire suppression adequate for the chemicals being stored. Just negligence, wrapped in corporate cost-cutting. The Basel disaster proved something terrifying. Industrial disasters don't need explosions to cause permanent damage. Sometimes the poison just flows downstream, silent, invisible, unstoppable. Europe responded with revolutionary environmental protections. The Rhine eventually recovered, but Basel left a permanent scar, a reminder that rivers don't recognize borders, and neither does industrial poison. The Toulouse AZF factory explosion, September 21, 2001. 10:17 a.m. The world was still reeling from 9/11, 10 days earlier. In Toulouse, France, workers at the AZF fertilizer factory were going through their normal Friday routine. Then 300 tons of ammonium nitrate exploded without warning. The blast created a crater 10 meters deep and 50 meters wide. The shockwave raced through Toulouse at supersonic speed, shattering windows up to 3 kilometers away. Buildings collapsed, schools were destroyed, hospitals were damaged, 31 people died instantly, 2,500 were injured, 30,000 homes were rendered uninhabitable. The explosion was so powerful that people initially thought it was a terrorist attack, a continuation of 9/11's nightmare. But this wasn't terrorism, it was something somehow worse. Preventable industrial negligence. Investigations revealed catastrophic failures in chemical storage, industrial zoning, and oversight. A massive chemical bomb had been sitting in the middle of a major city, and nobody thought to question it. Public outrage was immediate and fierce. How could this happen in modern France? How could 300 tons of explosive material be stored next to neighborhoods? Toulouse proved that even in the 21st century, with all our technology and regulations, industrial complacency could still devastate major cities in seconds. The lesson? Progress doesn't eliminate risk. It just changes the shape of the explosion. The Prestige oil spill, November 13, 2002. The oil tanker Prestige, carrying 77,000 tons of heavy fuel oil, suffered structural damage during a storm off the coast of Spain. Authorities faced a decision: tow it to port and risk contaminating harbors, or push it away from shore and hope for the best. They chose distance. It was the wrong choice. 6 days later, the Prestige broke apart and sank, unleashing one of the worst environmental disasters in European maritime history. Thousands of tons of thick, toxic oil gushed into the Atlantic. Black sludge coated over 1,000 kilometers of coastline across Spain, Portugal, and France. Fishing communities were destroyed overnight. Generations of fishermen watched their livelihoods disappear beneath black tar. Wildlife suffocated. Beaches became graveyards. The cleanup took years and cost billions, and even then, the damage couldn't be fully undone. Though the death toll was indirect, the economic and environmental devastation was staggering. The Prestige exposed critical failures: aging tanker fleets operated by companies with no accountability, maritime regulations with no teeth, and crisis management that prioritized politics over containment. Europe responded with stricter shipping standards and environmental protocols, but for the fishing villages along the Atlantic coast, the damage was already done, and permanent. The Buncefield Oil Depot explosion, December 11, 2005. 6:01 a.m. At the Buncefield Oil Storage Facility, one of the largest in Europe, fuel was being pumped into a storage tank overnight. A gauge failed. Nobody noticed. The tank overflowed. Fuel vapors spread silently across the depot. Then they found an ignition source. The explosion was biblical. It was the largest peacetime explosion in British history, so powerful it registered on seismographs across Europe. The fireball was visible from space. The shockwave shattered windows 10 miles away and damaged over 2,000 buildings. Fires burned for 5 days straight, consuming millions of liters of fuel. Miraculously, almost impossibly, there were no direct fatalities. But make no mistake, this was pure luck. If the explosion had occurred hours later during shift change, hundreds would have died. Investigations revealed a cascade of failures, malfunctioning safety systems, ignored alarms, inadequate monitoring, and a culture where warnings were dismissed as inconvenient. Buncefield became a wake-up call for the fuel industry. It proved that modern infrastructure, no matter how advanced, can still harbor apocalyptic potential. The lesson? Safety systems only work if people actually pay attention to them. Technology can't protect you from negligence, and in an instant, complacency can turn an ordinary morning into an inferno.